Books on Tape presents The Family, The Real Story of the Bush Dynasty by Kitty Kelley. Read by Susan Denaker. The great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, June 11th, 1962, Commencement Address, Yale University. Author's Note. I believe that the people we most admire most influence our country, so those are the lives I've chosen to examine. My subjects have included Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, Elizabeth Taylor, Frank Sinatra, Nancy Reagan, the British monarchy, and now the Bushes. They were not simply public figures who happened to be celebrities. When I wrote about them, they were all living icons who, for better or for worse, substantially influenced our culture. I stress the word living because I believe in writing books about people who are alive and quite capable of defending themselves. The dead have no recourse to a biographer's unsparing revelations. The family, by the nature of its scope and historical perspective, varies from that formula a bit. Prescott Bush, the scion of the Bush dynasty, is of course an important figure in this book, but the focus is meant to be on his son and grandson, George H.W. and George W., because they have far surpassed Prescott in political and historical importance. Without exception, the contemporary figures I've chosen to chronicle have been reluctant and uncooperative, and in each instance I have encountered resistance as I tried to go behind the public image to the other side of the myth. As unauthorized biographies, my books have been controversial and drawn fire, even litigation on occasion, but I have never lost a lawsuit. Before publication, each book is vetted by several sets of lawyers. Facts and sources are checked and rechecked, and sources documented. Still, through no fault of my own, I became a darling of the American Bar Association. In 1984, before I had written a word of his biography, Frank Sinatra sued. He claimed that only he or someone he authorized could write about his life. After a year, he dropped the suit, and my book was published in 1986. After my biography of Nancy Reagan was published in 1991, Sinatra's lawyer, Mickey Rudin, brought suit because he had been named as a source and objected to being thanked for his help, which he had in fact provided. He went to court and lost. He appealed and pursued his case up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals before losing again. In 1997, my book on the British royal family was published in 22 foreign languages, but was deemed too explosive to be published in English in the United Kingdom. With every book I've written, I've encountered a certain amount of hesitancy on the part of potential sources, because they are understandably reluctant to talk about powerful people, either for fear of retribution or for fear of being socially ostracized. The amount of trepidation I encountered in writing this book was unprecedented, but perhaps that's what comes from writing about a sitting president whose family has a long reach. Many sources were reluctant to tell their stories on the record, and much as I dislike using unnamed sources, in some cases I had no choice. Many people who know the Bushes, friends, former employees, classmates, business associates, and even a few family members, were skittish about speaking for attribution. I heard an endless stream of excuses and apologies, some comical, others disconcerting. You don't know that family. If they think I've talked to you, they'll never speak to me again. This town is too small to rile the Bushes. I want to live to see my grandchildren. One man said, "You can't use my name. They'll come after me. The Bushes are thugs." Thugs? Surely you're kidding, I said. "Look what they did in Florida during the 2000 recount," he answered, and then detailed the Brooks Brothers riot of Republican activists who helped stop the voting in Miami by storming the canvassing board. To prove his point, the man sent records showing that many of the rioters in pinstriped suits had been paid by the Bush Recount Committee. The saddest example of the fear the Bushes instill involves a family whose Jewish son was subjected to a prank by George W. Bush when both boys attended Andover. Even 40 years later, the family was afraid to revisit the incident and be identified. The school did not take disciplinary action. By then, George Herbert Walker Bush was a revered campus legend. The elder Bush joined the Andover Board of Trustees in 1963 and served until 1979, which protected his younger sons from expulsion when they both broke school rules. Jeb Bush was caught drinking, and Marvin Bush was doing drugs, but unlike other students in similar situations, the Bushes were not even suspended. In writing contemporary biography, I've become accustomed to reluctant subjects who do not want their lives depicted without being able to control the content. But the Bushes, public figures for over 50 years, have been, by far, the most reluctant. The family is obsessed with secrecy, and their potential for retaliation is great. Consequently, some people were afraid to go on the record for fear of losing their jobs, getting hit with an IRS audit, or worse. And it was fear not just of President Bush, 43, but of his father, who did all he could to close every door I opened. On November 6, 2002, I wrote to the former president as a matter of courtesy. I said I was under contract to do a historical retrospective of his family and would appreciate an interview and the opportunity to verify certain facts. Renowned for a lifetime of writing letters, George H.W. ignored mine. Instead, he directed his aide, Jean Becker, to call Stephen Rubin, the publisher of Doubleday. She did that on November 11, 2002. President Bush has asked me to say that he and his family are not going to cooperate with this book because the author wrote a book about Nancy Reagan that made Mrs. Reagan unhappy. The president's excuse was, to put it mildly, disingenuous. For Bush, 41, the only unhappy part of that book concerned the former First Lady's anecdote about him and his girlfriend. Barbara Bush was so angry about Mrs. Reagan's revelation that she instructed Roger Kennedy, then director of the National Museum of American History, to remove a display featuring my books on Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis and Nancy Reagan from the First Lady's exhibit in the Smithsonian. Mr. Kennedy genuflected to Mrs. Bush, and the display was removed. 3 months after publication of the Reagan book, George Herbert Walker Bush was President of the United States. He, too, expressed his displeasure with me in his diary, which he published in All the Best, George Bush, My Life in Letters and Other Writings. Bush's entry for July 25, 1991. Have you ever had one of those days when it just isn't too good? Just one of those days when you want to say forget it? Oh yes, the president of Paramount that owns one of the big book companies called in to say that Kitty Kelley wants to write a book either about the Bushes or the Royals, and he turned it down. That's nice. A book by Kitty Kelley with everything else I've got on my mind. I can't see her ever writing anything nice. For the record, I never proposed writing a book about the Bushes until after the Supreme Court decision of 2000, when they became an American political dynasty, one of only 2 families in history to put a father and a son in the White House. Suddenly, by fiat, they had become interesting. After 4 years researching this book and interviewing nearly 1,000 people, I now understand why the former president would not cooperate. There are many family secrets he wants to protect. From the very beginning, he threw up every possible barrier. His prep school.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?